England, winter 1943. The airfield slept under a blanket of frost and ash. A cold dawn pressed against the hangar doors, seeping through cracks and metal seams like a ghost searching for warmth. The war had aged everything, even the air tasted tired. Out on the tarmac, a B-17 bomber sat wounded, its silver skin scorched and its belly torn open, steam hissing softly from its core. Inside the hangar, a handful of men stood around it in silence. Their breath drifted in small white clouds, their boots echoing against the concrete floor. Tools lay scattered like the aftermath of a desperate surgery. Someone coughed, someone else muttered a curse, and in the middle of them all, a mechanic, young, quiet, with hands blackened by oil, stared at the wreck as though he could see its pain. They called him Mac, short for McAllister. No one knew his first name anymore. He'd been fixing engines since before the war, when airplanes were still a wonder, not weapons. His eyes were calm, almost too calm, the kind of eyes that looked at broken things and saw not ruin, but a puzzle waiting to be solved. He ran a gloved hand over the bomber's side, tracing the jagged lines of burnt metal. Electrical fire, he murmured, ran through the control system like lightning. He crouched down, peering beneath the cockpit panel. The wires were blackened threads, brittle and useless. The bomber's heart had stopped. Behind him, a flight officer broke the silence. "How long, Mac?" Mac didn't answer right away. He pulled out a flashlight, its beam cutting through smoke and shadow. The interior looked like a cave, melted fuses, charred insulation, panels half torn off by frantic hands. He exhaled slowly. Not soon, he finally said, "Might be never." The officer's jaw tightened. "We need that bird in the air by dawn. Command says this strike's not optional." "I know. You think it can be done." Mac stood up, the beam of his flashlight catching the dust swirling in the cold air. "If I can find where it died," he said quietly, "maybe I can bring it back." The others exchanged looks, half hope, half disbelief.
We can't.
The air outside
Turn back
rumbled
now.
faintly with the sound
The
of
mission
other
depends
bombers
on it.
warming up, their engines coughing smoke into the
We
grey
can't.
morning. The
Turn
world
back
was
now.
moving forward.
The mission
Only
depends
this
on it.
one lay still. Mac
We've gotta
climbed
make
up
it
into
back.
the cockpit. The smell
mission
hit him
depends
first,
on it.
burnt
I know.
rubber, metal,
We'll make it
and
together.
something else, faint but familiar. The bitter scent of failure. He sat where the pilot once had, fingers brushing the yoke, imagining what had happened. A sudden surge, a short circuit, a flash. He could almost
need to
hear
check
the
the
panic
fuel
in the
lines
radio,
before the next
the
sortie.
shouted words, the
There's no
silence
room
that
for error
followed.
out there.
He took a slow breath and began to work, one wire at a time, one connection after another. Hours slipped by unnoticed. The light outside changed from silver to white, from white to the dull gold of late morning. The hangar's shadows stretched across the floor like long, cold fingers. Mac's hands moved methodically, almost rhythmically, his mind half in the present, half in the machine's memory. He saw the path of the current, how it must have travelled, how it burned through junctions until it found nothing left to destroy. It wasn't just damage, it was a story written in heat and smoke. At noon, the base commander arrived, a tall man with lines carved deep into his face. "Report," he demanded. Mac didn't look up. "Still tracing it, sir." "Tracing won't get that bird flying. You've got men counting on this. If it doesn't go up, those convoys don't get hit, and our boys on the ground pay the price. I understand. Then hurry." The commander left, his boots echoing through the hangar. The pressure lingered behind him like a shadow. Mac leaned back on his stool, rubbing his eyes. Fatigue crept in, but his mind refused to stop turning. Something about the wiring pattern didn't make sense. The fault had spread too fast, unnaturally fast. Maybe a design flaw, maybe sabotage, or maybe something no one had noticed yet. He reached for a tattered notebook in his pocket, its pages filled with sketches, notes, and aughts scribbled during endless nights of repairs. He flipped through, scanning old diagrams of electrical layouts. Then he froze. A single page, a rough sketch of a power reroute he'd once tested on another aircraft, months ago. It wasn't regulation. It wasn't safe, but it had worked. He looked up at the bomber, at the lifeless dials and burn. Doubt fuses. Could it work again? Rain began to fall outside, soft at first, then harder, drumming on the hangar roof. The sound filled the silence between his thoughts. He stood, stretching his aching back, and walked to the far workbench. Piles of scrap metal, wire spools, and broken switches stared back at him like a junkyard of forgotten hope. He gathered what he could: bits of copper, stripped cables, half-melted connectors. None of it was regulation, grade, but war didn't wait for perfection. By evening, the hangar was alive again. The hum of tools, sparks from the welder lighting the air like fireflies. The men watched from a distance, whispering among themselves. Mac didn't hear them. His world had narrowed to circuits and current, to the fragile heartbeat he was trying to revive. He worked until the lights flickered and the power cut out for the night. Only the faint orange glow from a lantern remained, casting long shadows across the metal skeleton of the bomber. Mac sat on the floor, back against a toolbox, staring up at the machine that refused to live. He could hear the rain still, the muffled roar of engines from distant runways, the ghostly hum of something unfinished. He whispered to himself, not in defeat but in reflection, "Every machine has a soul. You just have to listen for it." Outside, lightning flashed across the horizon, illuminating the vast stretch of fields and hangars. For a moment, it lit up the bomber's nose, the name painted in chipped white letters, Silver Ghost. The name suited it. As the thunder rolled in, Mac closed his eyes, replaying every wire, every junction in his mind. There was something he was missing, something right in front of him, hiding beneath the burnt chaos. He reached into his pocket again and pulled out the small drawing, the alternate power path. His thumb brushed the pencil lines. It was risky, unconventional, but maybe the only chance left. A spark of resolve ignited quietly in his chest. Tomorrow he'd try again. He didn't know it yet, but that single decision, that refusal to give up, would set in motion a miracle the war would never forget. Morning came slow and pale. The hangar was colder than before breath turned to mist, and the steel walls held the chill like memory. Outside, engines coughed to life across the airfield, a metallic chorus announcing another day of war. Inside, one man remained motionless at his workbench. Mac hadn't slept. His eyes were red, not from exhaustion alone, but from thought, endless, looping thought. Before the sun rose, he'd already taken the control panel apart again, spreading its guts across the table like the pages of a story only he could read. The burnt smell was still there. It clung to the metal, to his clothes, to his skin. He'd grown used to it, the scent of defeat made familiar. But somewhere beneath that charred tang was another smell, something faint, almost hopeful, the clean scent of polished copper. He turned over a coil in his hands, thin strands glinting in the half-light. He whispered to himself, "We're not dead yet." A voice echoed from the doorway. "Mac, you're still at it." It was Lieutenant Harris, one of the pilots scheduled for the mission. His face was drawn tight, eyes hollow with sleeplessness. "They're talking about grounding the Ghost," he said, "pulling another crew, another plane." Mac didn't look up. "They don't have another plane." Harris sighed. "Then they'll send us without one. You know what that means." He did. It meant men on the ground surrounded, waiting for air cover that might never come. It meant failure rippling outward like shockwaves from a single dead engine. Mac finally stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and faced the pilot. "Give me a few more hours," he said quietly. "Command's giving you 2. Then Harris left, the door slamming shut behind him, leaving the echo of engines and rain. Mac stared at the bomber once more, the way the light caught the scorched fuselage, the silent instruments inside the cockpit. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a body on a table, waiting for resurrection. He climbed back up, laying his tools beside the open panel. The drawing from his notebook was pinned beside it, edges smudged with grease. The alternate power route was rough, rerouting energy through auxiliary circuits not meant for sustained current. It was the kind of thing a man did only when there was no other choice. He took a long breath and began. Each movement was deliberate, slow, patient. The first wire stripped, measured, soldered. Sparks danced, small and sharp. His hands trembled not from fear, but from the precision the moment demanded. Every connection felt like a heartbeat, every misstep a death sentence. Hours passed unnoticed. The rain stopped, leaving behind a quiet so deep it felt sacred. Somewhere outside, boots crunched against gravel, orders were shouted, but the hangar was sealed in its own world, a cocoon of focus and stubborn will. Mac worked by instinct now, guided less by manuals and more by something older intuition. The kind a man earns after years of listening to machines breathe. He heard the footsteps return before the door opened. Mac, came the voice again, Harris, this time joined by the base commander. We're out of time. Mac didn't stop. He sodded another point, the smell of molten flux rising like smoke. Almost there. The commander stepped closer, impatient, stiff in his tone. If this doesn't work, I'm grounding the whole crew. You understand? Mac finally looked up. His face was calm, eyes steady. If I stop now, it definitely won't work. The commander hesitated. There was something in that voice, quiet, unshakable, that left no room for argument. He nodded once, curtly, and stepped back. Mac turned again to his work. His fingers brushed over the network of wires, following the new circuit he'd built, unconventional, dangerous, but alive with potential. He connected the final lead to the main relay, tightening it until the metal sang faintly under pressure. Power, he said softly. A mechanic by the generator flipped the switch. The hangar lights flickered. The bomber groaned, not from pain, but from awakening. The control board hummed faintly, one needle trembling, then another. A faint pulse of current crawled through the system. The sound was so small it could have been missed, but to Mac it was everything. It's breathing. He whispered. The commander frowned. Is that stable, for now? Mac said, eyes fixed on the dials. But I don't know how long she'll hold. The pilot stepped forward, placing a hand on the fuselage like he was touching an old friend. Then we take her up before she changes her mind. Mac almost smiled. It wasn't joy, it was the fragile satisfaction of a man who's dragged something back from the edge. He wiped his hands and packed his tools, every motion deliberate, controlled. The weight of the night still clung to him, but something lighter stirred beneath it, the beginning of belief. The commander's radio crackled. Enemy movement confirmed. Scramble in 30 minutes. Everyone froze. The words hit like a gunshot. 30 minutes. Harris looked at Mac. Can she fly? Mac turned toward the bomber, listening not to the machine, but to the silence around it. He could almost hear its heart, steady now, quiet but strong. She'll fly, he said, if we treat her gentle. He watched as the crew moved in, strapping gear, loading ammunition, checking gauges. Each man glanced toward him in passing small nods, unspoken gratitude. None of them said thank you. There wasn't time. As they rolled the bomber toward the open doors, dawn light spilled inside, pale and cold, yet full of promise. The air smelled of rain and smoke, and the faint sweetness of fuel. Mac stood by the doorway, his hands stained, his eyes hollow with fatigue. The engines coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. The hangar shook. The sound filled his chest like thunder. For the first time in 2 days, he smiled barely. Not because the war was won, but because, for this moment, the impossible had bent. The bomber taxied out across the wet runway, wheels slicing through puddles, engines screaming defiance at the grey sky. Mac watched it go until it vanished into the mist, a ghost reborn. When the hangar fell quiet again, he sat down on the cold floor, leaning back against the wall. His body was shaking now, every muscle screaming for rest. But his mind was still replaying the hum, the rhythm, the way life had flowed back into dead metal. He didn't know what would happen up there, whether the repair would hold, whether the bomber would make it home. But deep down, something told him this was only the beginning. Because sometimes in the darkest hour, a single act of defiance, a man refusing to give up on a broken machine, can echo far beyond the sound of engines. And though he couldn't see it yet, that echo would carry through the war, all the way to legend. The storm rolled in before dawn. Sheets of cold rain lashed against the hangar doors, each drop echoing like the ticking of a clock that refused to stop. Inside, the air was thick with oil, sweat, and the bitter tang of exhaust. The silver ghost stood in the center of it, all not dead this time, but fragile, trembling on the edge between flight and failure. Mac was already there, sleeves rolled up, collar damp with mist. He'd been awake for 30 hours. His hands moved with the slow precision of a surgeon, though his body begged for rest. The temporary fix had worked once, but now, under the relentless orders of command, he had to make it permanent. The first flight had been a success, at least by rumor. The bomber had returned with its crew alive, limping through the clouds, engines coughing but holding. They said the spoon, fix that crude, desperate bridge, had carried them home. But rumors weren't blueprints, and hope wasn't enough for another mission. This morning, the ghost had come back for inspection. And now it sat silent again, rain pooling beneath its wings, awaiting judgment. Mac knelt beside the open panel, tracing his finger along the makeshift connections. The copper still gleamed faintly, but the insulation was gone. The spoon, his improvised conductor, had blackened at the edges, the metal warped by heat. It had done its duty, but it wouldn't last another sortie. Behind him, boots stomped across the wet floor. Voices rose, clipped, urgent, military. Is it ready yet? The question came from Captain Ross, operations officer for the squadron. His tone wasn't cruel, just desperate. Every word carried the weight of men waiting for orders they didn't want to give. Not yet, Mac said without looking up. Ross checked his watch. You've got 6 hours before briefing. Those planes go up whether you're ready or not. Command wants every bomber operational, no exceptions. Mac tightened a bolt, sparks flashing as metal kissed metal. If they go up like this, sir, they won't come back. Ross exhaled through his nose, the sound halfway between frustration and resignation. Then make sure they do. He turned and left, his silhouette swallowed by the fog outside. The mechanic was alone again, except for the faint hum of the generator and the whispering rain. He stared at the spoon, resting on the bench like a relic. It wasn't just a tool now, it was a story proof that the impossible could be bent if you were stubborn enough to try. But even miracles had limits. Mac wiped his hands and leaned over the schematics spread across the table. The papers were stained with grease and rain, edges curling from humidity. He'd redrawn the entire electrical grid by hand, searching for another way to channel power, something sustainable, something that wouldn't melt mid-flight. But every line he traced led to the same dead end. Too much current, too little material. He rubbed his temples. There's always a way. He whispered, there has to be. The door creaked open again. This time it was Private Langley, barely 20, the youngest mechanic on base. He carried 2 mugs of black coffee, steaming in the cold air. You should drink something, Langley said. Mac accepted the mug, took a sip and winced at the bitterness. You call this coffee? Langley shrugged. Closest thing we've got to jet fuel. A brief silence settled between them, the kind that hangs heavy between mentor and apprentice. Langley glanced toward the bomber. Is it true, sir, that you fixed it with a spoon? Mac smiled faintly. Don't believe everything you hear. But you did, didn't you? He looked at the spoon again, its shape unmistakable even in shadow. Sometimes you use what the world gives you, he said softly. Even if it wasn't made for the job. The young man nodded, eyes wide with awe. I want to be like that one day. Mac's smile faded, replaced by something gentler, tired wisdom. No, son, you want to be better, because war'll make you do things you never thought you'd do. Fix things you shouldn't have to fix. Langley lowered his gaze. Yes, sir. The sound of thunder rolled over the airfield, deep and distant. Outside, more bombers were being fueled, their engines rumbling through the rain. The whole base moved like a machine, every man, every bolt, every second working toward one shared purpose, survival through precision. Mac drained the last of his coffee and set the cup down beside his tools. All right, he said, let's get back to work. For the next few hours they worked in silence. The hangar became a world of noise and concentration, the hiss of solder, the buzz of voltage testing, the clatter of wrenches against steel. Each failure sparked a curse under Mac's breath. Each small success went uncelebrated. Time became elastic, stretched thin by tension. By midday, his hands were shaking. Sweat dripped down his neck, stinging the cuts on his knuckles. The new wiring route refused to balance. Every adjustment triggered another short, another spark, another wave of frustration. He slammed a wrench down. Damn it! The echo rang through the hangar. Langley froze, unsure whether to speak. Mac took a long breath, forcing his voice steady. "Sorry, just keep that light steady." Langley obeyed, holding the lamp close while Mac leaned in again, eyes scanning the intricate mess of wires. His brain worked faster than his hands, running through every possibility, every permutation. There had to be a path that didn't end in smoke. Outside, the rain slowed, the light shifted from grey to silver. Somewhere beyond the hangar, a siren wailed briefly the sound of distant drills, or maybe another warning. It didn't matter, the war was always somewhere nearby. Mac's focus narrowed again. He adjusted one small connection, then another. The hum changed pitch. For a moment, everything aligned a perfect tone. A note of balance before the circuit blew with a soft pop and a puff of smoke. He closed his eyes. Langley exhaled, defeated. That was the last fuse. Mac nodded slowly. "Then we make one." He reached for the scrap box and began searching bits of wire, glass shards, melted connectors. To anyone else it looked like trash, to him it was possibility. Langley watched as Mac pieced together fragments, reshaping failure into function. The old man's hands moved like they remembered something sacred. When the crude fuse was ready, he slid it into place, twisted the wire ends together, and whispered, "Let's see if you still have some fight left." He flipped the switch. The control board flickered once, twice, then steadied a faint green glow spreading across the gauges like dawn returning to a dark sky. Mac's shoulders dropped with relief. He didn't smile, but something in his chest eased for the first time in hours. Langley whispered, "You did it." Mac shook his head, "No, I bought us time." Outside, the loudspeaker crackled to life. "Aircrews report to briefing." "Repeat, all aircrews report to briefing." Langley looked at him nervously. "They're going up again." Mac stared at the faintly humming lights, the pulse of the machine he'd stitched together with scraps and willpower. He could feel its fragility in his bones like a heartbeat that might stop at any moment. He placed his hand gently on the console, as if making a silent promise. "Then we'd better make sure she holds," he said quietly. And as the rain eased into mist, the hangar filled once more with the rhythm of work, the sound of defiance against time, against orders, against the weight of a war that asked for miracles from men with nothing but their hands. Evening fell like a curtain of smoke. The rain had stopped, but the air still trembled with the scent of fuel and ozone. The hangar lamps burned low, their filaments flickering under the strain of the old generator. Each light buzzed faintly, echoing the nervous energy of the men inside. Mac stood alone beside the silver ghost, sleeves rolled, chest smeared with grease and ash. The bomber loomed over him like a sleeping beast, its metal skin glinting in the half-light. Around him, other crews hurried shouting, checking instruments, tightening bolts. War never paused long enough for comfort. The temporary circuit he'd built still held for now. The gauges hummed, needles steady, but he didn't trust it. Not yet. He needed to push it harder to see how close it could get to breaking before it did. He reached into the cockpit and flipped the ignition. The engines coughed once, twice then roared awake, vibrating through the concrete floor. The entire hangar shuddered. Men turned to look. Mac climbed into the pilot's seat, eyes locked on the dials. The sound was deafening, yet he could feel the rhythm beneath it, the pulse of the machine's heart. It was uneven, slight, but wrong. He leaned closer, listening. The left alternator was lagging, a second too slow, drawing too much current through his improvised connection. If that imbalance grew mid-flight, it would overheat, and the same miracle that saved them before would become their death sentence. He killed the power. The engine whined down, the propellers slowing to silence. For a long moment, the hangar echoed with only the dripping of rainwater from the roof. Mac rubbed his forehead, exhausted. Every solution unraveled into another problem. Then he heard footsteps, heavy ones. McAllister said a voice. It was Captain Ross again, and this time his patience was gone. Behind him stood 2 aircrew and a communications officer, their faces tight with strain. "We've got movement over the channel. Intelligence says Luftwaffe's repositioning tonight. The Ghost needs to lead formation by midnight. Midnight, Mac repeated, "That's less than 4 hours." Ross's gaze was iron. "Then I suggest you work fast." Mac stepped out of the cockpit, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sir, I can't guarantee she'll hold at altitude. The wiring isn't balanced. If it fails up there, she'll hold." Ross interrupted. "She has to." The air between them tightened. Outside, the sky was black, the horizon flashing faintly with distant lightning. War had no patience for perfection. Ross's tone softened just slightly. "Look, Mac, I know you've done more than anyone expected, but Command doesn't want reasons anymore. They want results." Mac said nothing. He just turned back to the bomber. When the captain left, the hangar fell into silence again, except for the faint buzz of electricity crawling through the rewired veins of the plane. Langley returned soon after, carrying a box of spare parts. "Orders?" he asked quietly. Mac nodded toward the control board. "We're going to reroute the secondary line. Try to spread the load before it burns through again." For the next hour, they worked wordlessly. The air smelled of hot metal and sweat. Every sound the twist of a wrench, the crackle of a solder felt amplified, like the world was holding its breath. Langley's hand slipped once, burning his finger on the iron. He hissed and shook it off. "Sorry." Mac didn't look up. "Pain means you're doing something right." The boy smirked faintly. "That your philosophy?" Mac tightened another bolt. "That's war." They tested again. Power on. The engine roared, rattling the windows. Sparks spat from the panel, small, angry bursts of light. Langley flinched. "Hold it steady." Mac shouted over the noise. He adjusted the throttle, feeling the vibration through the floor. The left alternator screamed, redlining for a second, then leveled. The gauges flickered, then steadied. Mac's jaw tightened. The circuit was holding, barely, but holding. He exhaled, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Cut it." Langley hit the switch. The engine spun down, leaving behind a silence so deep it rang in their ears. Mac stepped back, staring at the bomber. "She'll fly." Langley grinned. "You mean it." "I mean she'll fly." Mac said quietly, "What happens after that isn't up to me." Hours later, the hangar doors yawned open, groaning against the wind. Floodlights from the runway cut through the mist, painting streaks of white across the bomber's skin. The crew filed in, pilots, gunners, engineers, each one silent, focused, carrying their fear the way soldiers carry weight they can't drop. Captain Ross approached him again. Final inspection. Mac nodded once. "All systems green. She'll run hot, but she'll run." Ross looked him over the dark circles under his eyes, the stains that no soap would ever remove. "You ever think of flying one of these things?" Mac gave a faint, humorless smile. "No, sir. I prefer keeping them alive." Ross clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Then tonight, you've already saved more lives than you know." The captain walked off, joining his crew at the base of the ladder. Mac watched as they climbed aboard, one by one disappearing into the belly of the plane. Langley stood beside him. "You think it'll hold?" Mac didn't answer immediately. The engines began to turn again low at first, then rising to a growl that shook the ground. He felt the vibrations run through his boots, up through his bones. It was the sound of faith and fear intertwined. He finally said, "If she was built to survive, she'll show us tonight." The bomber rolled forward into the storm. Rain returned in light sheets, glistening against the metal as it gained speed. The runway blurred under the spinning propellers, the lights reflecting off the puddles like broken stars. Mac stood in the doorway of the hangar, watching the silver ghost lift off a dark silhouette against the lightning sky. For a moment the world held still, the rain softened, the air stilled. And in that breath between thunder and silence, he could almost feel it, the pulse of the machine he had resurrected, carrying men into the unknown. He whispered to himself, voice nearly lost in the wind, "Don't fail them now." Then the storm swallowed the sound. The hangar lights flickered once more, and Mac sank into the nearest chair, every muscle finally giving way. Around him, tools lay scattered, wires curled like veins across the floor. He looked down at his hands, trembling, scarred, alive, and realized he'd never been this tired or this afraid. But beneath the exhaustion was something else, a strange, quiet pride. He had built something that shouldn't exist, something born of scraps and instinct, something that might just defy the odds. Outside, the thunder rolled again, distant now, as if the sky itself was waiting to see what would happen next. And in that moment, under the dim glow of the last working lamp, Mac understood what war really demanded. Not just courage or obedience, but creation, the kind of desperate ingenuity that turned spoons into salvation and fear into resolve. He didn't smile, he simply breathed, letting the hum of the hangar fade into silence. Tomorrow he would know if it held, tonight he could only wait. The morning after the storm came like an afterthought, pale light spilling across the soaked airfield, washing the world in muted silver. The ground still steamed where the rain had met the warm earth, and the sky was bruised with the memory of thunder. The silver ghost was gone. Max stood at the edge of the runway, coat collar turned up against the wind, eyes fixed on the horizon. The air carried a sound he had come to know faint at first, then growing, a deep mechanical heartbeat returning from far away. Engines. He squinted through the mist. A black dot emerged against the grey sky, wobbling slightly, wings trembling. Then another, and another returning bombers, limping home through the clouds. His chest tightened as he searched for one shape, one silhouette that mattered most. Their fourth in formation, the silver ghost. She came in low, dragging smoke, one engine stuttering but alive. The landing gear dropped unevenly, scraping the runway before locking into place. When her wheels finally kissed the ground, Mac exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since midnight. She'd made it back. Men ran to meet her, shouting orders, waving torches, pulling stretchers for the wounded. The smell of fuel filled the air, sharp and heavy. As the engines died, steam rose from the fuselage, glowing white in the morning light like breath escaping from a tired giant. Mac walked slowly toward the plane, boots crunching on wet gravel. The pilot, Captain Ross, climbed down the ladder, face blackened with soot, eyes bloodshot, grin trembling between relief and disbelief. "She held," Ross said, voice hoarse. "By God, she held." Mac only nodded. He touched the metal skin of the aircraft. It was still warm, humming faintly with residual current. She did her part. Ross clapped him on the shoulder, then turned away to brief command. The crew dispersed into the chaos of the airfield, their laughter thin but alive. When the noise faded, Mac was left alone beside the silent bomber. His eyes drifted to the panel where his makeshift circuit lay hidden, the spoon buried somewhere inside, warped, blackened, but victorious. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt a strange unease, the kind that comes when something works for reasons you can't fully explain. The fix had held through turbulence, flak, and the freezing air of the channel. But why? He opened the side panel, inspecting the damage. The spoon, his accidental savior, was fused solid now, welded by heat into a shape no longer recognizable. Around it, the wires were intact, but warped, carrying faint scorch marks that told a story he didn't like. The system hadn't survived because it was strong. It had survived because it had bent, just enough without breaking. Luck, he murmured, just luck. He sat down on a crate, eyes distant, the early sun glinting off puddles around his boots. The field was alive again, engines warming up, men shouting. Orders barked across the air yet inside him. Everything was quiet, too quiet. He pulled the spoon free with a gloved hand. The metal flaked as it cooled, black powder falling to the floor. It wasn't supposed to have worked, and yet, against every law of engineering, it had. The thought lingered like a whisper. What if the answer wasn't luck at all? He turned the twisted piece over in his palm. The shape, uneven, dented, curved, had redistributed the current. It had balanced the charge in a way the Standard lay out never could, not by design but by accident, a perfect imperfection. A new idea flickered in his mind, small but alive, like the first spark after darkness. He stood suddenly, searching the workbench for a piece of paper. His hands moved before his thoughts caught up. He sketched the spoon's shape, tracing the curvature, noting the heat stress lines, the voltage shift points. His pencil moved fast, desperate, as if something inside him was racing the clock. Langley appeared in the doorway, startled to see him working already. "Mac, you're supposed to be off duty." Mac didn't look up. There's no off-duty for an idea. Langley frowned. They just got back an hour ago. You should rest. Rest comes after answers. He circled part of the drawing, the warped angle of the spoon's bowl. See this curve? It redirected the flow, forced it through a narrower line, like a river through a canyon. It stabilized the current without a resistor. Langley blinked. By accident. Max smiled faintly. Accidents are just inventions that didn't know what they were yet. He turned to the shelves, rummaging through spare parts. We're going to make another one. Better this time. Langley hesitated. But the plane's grounded for inspection. Command said it needed fixing. That's what we're doing. The young man sighed, but followed anyway. Together they laid out metal scraps, bits of aluminum, brass and wire. Mac's movements were faster now, deliberate, charged with purpose. Every strike of the hammer rang like punctuation in an unfinished sentence. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint echo of church bells from the nearby village. Inside, Mac's focus narrowed to the glint of metal under his lamp. He took a piece of flat steel and pressed it against the edge of the bench. Then, using the handle of his wrench, he began to bend it slow, methodical, matching the same warped shape the spoon had taken under heat. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't even proper engineering, but it was something. Langley handed him the torch, the flame hissing softly. Mac heated the metal until it glowed faintly orange. The smell of burning flux filled the air. He adjusted the angle, cooling it in a basin of water, then held it up to the light, a perfect curve, the same one that had carried life through chaos. He turned to Langley. "This isn't a fix anymore," he said. "It's a design." Langley smiled nervously. "What do we call it?" Max set the piece down, studying it like a sculptor examining the first form of something eternal. "We don't call it anything yet," he said quietly. "Let's see if it deserves a name." He reconnected the wiring, replacing the spoon with his new creation. The fit was tight, precise. When it clicked into place, he felt a strange calm, as if the machine itself approved. He stepped back. Power it. Langley hesitated, then flipped the switch. The system hummed to life. The gauges flickered once, then steadied. The current ran smooth, cleaner than before. Mac's breath caught. "It's working," Langley grinned. "It's holding." Mac's eyes glinted in the soft light. "It's more than holding." He leaned closer, listening to the hum, steady, balanced, almost melodic. "It's alive." The hum filled the hangar like a heartbeat, soft but certain. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the quiet rhythm of electricity flowing through metal, the language of creation. Mac reached into his pocket and pulled out his notebook. He wrote a single line across the page, the words clean and deliberate, rewired circuit adaptive conductor. Born from failure, he closed the book gently. "Langley," he said. "Yes, sir. Fetch me another spoon." Langley blinked. "Sir." Mac smiled, small, tired, but alive again. "We might just need it." The sun had dipped behind the hangar roofs, leaving a deep amber glow that filtered through dust and smoke. The day was ending, but inside the workshop, it felt as though something entirely new was beginning. The hum of the rewired circuit pulsed softly, steady and sure, like the slow heartbeat of a giant rediscovering its strength. The air was thick with the smell of oil and metal, the kind that seeps into your clothes and stays with you long after you leave. Mac stood in silence, staring at the control board, one hand resting on the metal frame. It was working, perfectly. Langley was still beside him, half smiling, half afraid to believe it. "Sir, it's stable. Voltage hasn't dropped in over 20 minutes. Mac nodded, eyes still locked on the readings. "That's the thing about balance," he murmured. "Once you find it, you don't let go." He turned down the generator's power a fraction. The hum lowered, smooth and unbroken. Every indicator held. The warped curve, the shape that had begun as an accident, was distributing current more efficiently than any official design he'd seen. He exhaled slowly, finally stepping back. "It's not a repair anymore. It's an evolution." Langley looked at him, confusion flickering across his face. Evolution. Mac wiped his hands on a rag, then pointed to the new conductor, that curved, gleaming shape replacing the burnt spoon. "Everything in war breaks," he said quietly. "Engines, systems, men. But the ones that last aren't the strongest. They're the ones that learn how to bend before they shatter." Langley didn't answer. He didn't need to. The meaning hung heavy in the warm air. The hangar doors creaked open, letting in a gust of wind that carried the sounds of the airfield shouting, engines coughing to life, the clatter of tools against concrete. Beyond the noise, the low, endless hum of the war itself. A runner from command entered, breathless. Captain Ross needs a systems check in 30 minutes. Silver Ghost taking off again. Langley turned to Mac, alarmed. They can't, she just landed. Mac was already moving, gathering tools. They're not asking if we think they should. They're telling us. The runner hesitated. Sir, they said to make it quick. The Germans are regrouping near Calais. Every minute counts. Tell them it'll be ready. Mac said flatly. The young soldier nodded and ran out, boots splashing through puddles. Langley followed close behind as Mac climbed back into the cockpit. The faint smell of ozone filled the air. The gauges still glowed faintly green, promising life. You think it'll hold again? Langley asked. Mac checked each connection, tightening screws with quiet precision. If this design is what I think it is, it'll do more than hold. He gestured for Langley to start the auxiliary generator. The machine coughed, then steadied, the low rumble echoing through the hangar. The current began to flow, and once again, that soft, living hum returned, not the erratic sputter of strained circuits, but something even, graceful. He watched the dials, steady, perfect. Do you hear that? Mac asked, eyes narrowing. Langley tilted his head, just the hum. Mac smiled faintly. No, the silence underneath it. That's what you listen for. When a machine stops fighting itself, that's when you know it's right. He sat back, listening for a long time, lost in the rhythm. For the first time in weeks, he felt a strange peace, not relief, not pride, but something gentler. The quiet realization that perhaps the war, for all its chaos, had accidentally given him a moment of creation that would outlive it. Langley interrupted his thoughts softly. You think command will ever understand what you've done here? Mac didn't answer right away. He adjusted one of the switches, then finally said no, and they don't have to. He climbed down from the cockpit, walking to the side of the plane. His boots echoed against the concrete. This isn't about medals or reports. It's about getting them home. Langley nodded slowly, understanding. The mechanic placed a hand on the bomber's nose, the metal still warm. This bird's not just steel and circuits anymore, he said softly. She's got a piece of us inside her now. Maybe that's what keeps her alive. A moment passed still, silent, reverent. Then, with practiced efficiency, they began the pre-flight checks. Fuel lines, battery loads, cooling systems, every lever, every switch tested twice. The hangar filled with motion again, not frantic this time, but rhythmic, purposeful, alive with quiet faith. Outside, the rain clouds began to break, streaks of orange light painting the horizon. The air smelled of mud and fire and hope. Langley caught sight of something shining on the floor, the old spoon, or what was left of it, lying twisted in the corner. He picked it up, turning it in his hands. Should I toss it? Mac looked at it for a long moment. No. He said softly, keep it. Why? Because sometimes the thing that saved your life deserves a place to rest. Langley tucked it into his pocket. Moments later, the Silver Ghost's engines flared to life. The hangar filled with the thunder of power, returning not chaos this time, but strength. Mac's design held, and the vibrations ran smooth through the floor, into his bones. He felt it, the same spark that had driven him through every sleepless night, every failed test, every ounce of doubt. It was alive again, burning steady and quiet. As the bomber began to roll forward, its shadow stretched across the floor, passing over Mac's boots before disappearing into the twilight. He watched it go, the hum fading into the distance. Langley joined him at the door, eyes wide. You think she'll come back again? Mac's answer came slow, steady. If she doesn't, at least she'll fly true. They stood there until the sound vanished completely, nothing left but wind and the soft clicking of cooling metal. Mac turned back toward his bench, his tools waiting in silence. He reached for his notebook once more, flipping it open to the page where he had written his first discovery. Below it, he added one final line: perfection isn't built. It's found in the cracks where failure used to live. He set the pencil down, exhaled, and for the first time in years allowed himself a small, honest smile. Outside, the horizon glowed faintly gold, the brief, fragile peace before night returned. And somewhere far above the clouds, a bomber carried not just its crew, but a spark of human defiance forged from a spoon, a sleepless night, and a man who refused to stop listening. Night had swallowed the airfield whole. The sky above was a deep black sea, its waves of cloud drifting slow and heavy, hiding the moon. Only the low red glow of runway lamps cut through the darkness, faint and uncertain as if even light was cautious tonight. Inside the hangar, the world was alive again. Engines roared in the distance, radios crackled with clipped orders, and the smell of aviation fuel mixed with sweat, smoke, and fear. The silver ghost stood in the center, her wings slick with rain, her metal skin reflecting the faint crimson glow like veins pulsing under the skin of a living creature. But there was no peace inside her walls. Command had ordered another sortie, a last. It strike over the channel. Intelligence said German convoys were regrouping, and if they weren't hit tonight, hundreds of soldiers on the ground would pay the price by morning. The problem was simple on paper, but Mac knew better nothing about this night was simple. He was beneath the bomber now, lying on his back, tightening the last panel under the fuselage. The air was freezing, and each breath left a trail of mist that curled and vanished into the dark. The new circuit, the strange, improvised creation born from a spoon and desperation, had worked better than any design before it. It was genius by accident, brilliance born of exhaustion. But genius wasn't the same as perfection. Every time he heard the engines come alive, he felt a tremor of doubt in his chest. The kind of doubt that keeps a man awake long after the mission's done. Langley crouched beside him, holding a flashlight. "All readings are green, sir," he said, voice tight. "She's ready." Mac didn't answer immediately. He stared up at the belly of the bomber, the lines, the bolts, the faint shimmer of condensation along the rivets. Machines had never frightened him before, but tonight this one felt different, like something alive, aware, waiting for its chance to prove what it was made for. "Sir," Langley prompted again. Mac's voice came low. "Nothing's ever really ready." He sat up, stretching his sore back. The hangar was a blur of motion crews loading ammunition, pilots gathering near the briefing room, ground men shouting over the rising wind. Everyone moved fast because that's what war demanded. Captain Ross approached, flight jacket unzipped, helmet in hand. His face was streaked with grime, and something else, the quiet look of a man who had already accepted that luck could only last so long. "Mac," Ross said, "command's calling for final checks. We're wheels up in 15. Mac nodded. "I've done what I can. The new system's holding clean. No surges, no power lag." But Ross raised an eyebrow. "But," Mac hesitated, "it's still an experiment. I can't guarantee how it'll handle a full payload in crosswind." Ross chuckled, though it wasn't humor, more like defiance in disguise. "You never can you?" Mac looked up at him. "Machines are honest, Captain. They'll do what we make them do and nothing more. It's the men who lie to themselves." The words hung there heavy and true. Ross gave a slow nod. "Well, here's hoping your machine's as honest as you say." He turned to leave, then paused. "You know something, Mac? When this war's over, I'm going to tell them about you, about what you've done here." Mac shook his head. "Tell them about the ones who flew it. They're the ones who make it count." Ross smiled faintly and walked off into the noise and light. Mac stood there for a moment, watching the pilot disappear through the hangar doors. Beyond them, the runway glowed faintly red, streaked with rain and exhaust smoke. Engines thundered in the distance, a steady drumbeat against the storm. Langley broke the silence. "You think they'll make it back this time?" Mac didn't look at him. "That depends on whether I made it right." Langley frowned. "Sir, you always make it right." Mac sighed, wiping his hands on his rag. "Not always. Sometimes you just make it enough." He turned toward the bomber one last time. She looked different now, not just a machine, but a testament to everything they'd risked. Their sanity, their safety, their faith. The intercom buzzed overhead. "All flight crews to stations." Repeat, "All flight crews to stations." Scramble order confirmed. Men began to move faster, boots pounding against concrete, voices raised to be heard over the thunder of engines spinning up. Mac stepped back, his heart pounding in rhythm with the propellers. Every part of him wanted to believe, to trust the wires, the welds, the circuit he'd bent into being. but faith was fragile in wartime. It had to be earned again and again. Ross climbed aboard the Silver Ghost, followed by his crew. The engines came alive one by one, their roar filling the hangar like a living storm. The air shook with power, heat, and fear. Langley covered his ears, shouting over the noise, "She's holding steady." Mac's eyes stayed fixed on the dials, the glow from the gauges flickering against his face. He could feel every vibration through the floor, the machine talking to him, whispering its secrets, its doubts, its promise. For a moment, the system's rhythm wavered a flicker, so faint no one else would have noticed. But Mac did. His breath caught. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing at the board. "Come on." He whispered, "Stay with me." The hum steadied, the flicker passed. The machine found its balance again. He exhaled slow, deep, shaking. Ross's voice came through the radio. "Control, this is Ghost One. Systems green, ready for departure." The airfield lights blinked twice, the signal. Mac watched as the bomber began to roll, wheels slicing through the puddles, tail lifting as the engines reached full thrust. The roar filled the night, drowning out every other sound. Langley's eyes followed it, wide and awed. "She's flying again." The Silver Ghost tore through the mist, rising into the blackness like a streak of steel and flame. Mac stood motionless in the doorway of the hangar, rain hitting his face, the echo of engines vibrating through his bones. He didn't cheer, he didn't move, he just listened until the sound faded into the storm. He knew the moment of silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes before the truth, before you find out whether your creation will live or die. He turned back toward his workbench, the radio still crackling faintly behind him. His eyes landed on the schematic pinned to the wall, the drawing of the circuit, the strange curve that had become his obsession. He picked up his pencil and added one more note beneath it. "Test under pressure. Real results come when failure is the only teacher left." Then he set the pencil down and stared at the metal skeletons of Hoff, fixed parts surrounding him. Outside, thunder rolled again, and the hangar lights flickered once. He closed his eyes for a brief second, whispering to the empty air, "Come back to me, old girl." The wind howled through the cracks in the doors like an answer, cold, uncertain, alive. And far above the clouds, somewhere in that darkness, a single bomber carried the weight of every man's faith in one mechanic's impossible dream. The wind over the channel howled like a beast. Sheets of rain tore sideways through the clouds, hammering against the bomber's skin. Lightning flickered, turning the inside of the cockpit white for a heartbeat at a time. The Silver Ghost fought through it, engine straining, wings groaning with every gust. Inside, Captain Ross gripped the yoke with both hands, eyes locked on the instruments. His co-pilot, Jensen, read out altitude between bursts of static on the radio. The gauges trembled, but they held steady all except one. The power needle danced, twitching like a nervous pulse. Ross noticed powers fluctuating again.